All right, so this is the second video for today, and now we're going to go on to writing the comparison, right? So once we have the quote about Rose, then we want to say two things, right? First, we want to have the comparison of them, and then lastly, what do you think? So the comparison. So where we start to see the difference between Rose and Graff. Well, first of all, we know that they're both talking about intelligence, right? So last time I said you would write the similarities. So you're going to write how they're similar. They're both studying intelligence. They're both talking about theories of, cognition and how people work and get educated. And then the difference is that Graff is focusing on teaching and how teachers need to recognize this this change in the way that we understand intelligence, right? So what Graff is talking about in 2001 is that schools need to encourage intellectualism in many ways, right? So teachers need to recognize that if somebody is good at sports, that they have a high level of intelligence. That if somebody can memorize facts and figures, that's also a high level intelligence, but that's not the only type. And so he's talking about parents and educators, right? And so he says things like these conflicts that come up are sometimes because our interests are differing, right? So parents want one thing for their children and schools want another. And then last time we talked about how schools become competitive. And so students often were feeling in those environments that there's a competition and that the stakes get higher. And so we talked about the difference between some of these environments, right? And my point was that, all students have the ability to achieve a high level of success in white-collar jobs. It's really just about learning the skills, right? So if you learn the study skills and you kind of think about the power that you can get by developing those skills, that can make a difference. Now, you have to know who you are. So Graff says things like, he says, similar divisions, this is on page 32, similar divisions appear in response to the question of whether intellectualism is or is not already latent in their non-intellectual interests. Meaning, if you're good at sports, your high level of intelligence is under the surface. And so a teacher's job is to bring that up, right? And he says, students' ambivalence about this emerges into definitions and are sharpened to key distinctions which surface between intellectualism and pomposity or snobbishery. Or snobbery, right? So when we think about what Graff is saying, he's saying that in his research, he has found that students think that being book smart makes people snobby. And so this is something that I've encountered, right? So somehow my mother said to me one time, like, well, who do you think you are, right? Because I was at this fancy graduate school. And so that is like a thing in the blue collar environment, right? And so what Graff is saying is teachers and systems need to recognize this, right? And we need to kind of work within that to say to students, look, it's not snobbery. And navigating that can be difficult. And so when we think about this, like this version of education, Graff is arguing that it's intriguing. In other words, we should pay attention to it. The school should pay attention to it. But also for the student, that not to have those doubts, right? So basically what he's saying is you're smart enough to be here and you can achieve a high level of success based on knowing your own skill set and working on those skills and finding solutions. So not to insult anybody, right? And so this really changed the environment in college campuses because students really like this idea, right? That they could earn credits by doing internships, for example, or they could study a trade, and that would be considered an intellectual endeavor as well as, a money-making endeavor. And so, colleges like Suffolk are trying to acknowledge that, right? We have the HVAC, and we have the automotive, and we have the different technical majors. And these are really important. And so when you think about what Graff is saying, he's talking about you can be introduced to literature. You can be introduced to these theoretical things, these very high concepts of academia. And you can achieve that, and that an educated populace is a good thing to have, right? And so he talks about this, right? I added, so page 35, T.E.'s disclaimers, he's talking about the other researcher. I added that it didn't seem so wildly implausible to me to imagine that many gum-chewing kids who say it sucks may become English majors and critics. They aren't all sophisticated theories grounded in a gut reaction of that kind. What is most great criticism after all, but a great elaborate way of saying, in effect, it sucks or it's cool? And what he says, what's most important and intriguing here is expressing the doubts of analytical close reading, right? So that if students don't understand how to do these close readings, we can find other ways to attempt to answer these questions by playing games or by, giving students other ways to reflect on their own intellect. Okay, so, and then he says this thing at the end, right? Our premise, which we continued to test, was that it's such reflection, more than anything the teacher may say, that it will induce students to discover the hidden intellectual in themselves. Becoming an intellectual is still a pedagogical work in progress. So this is where they differ, right? What Graff is saying is that if the system supports the student, then the student will find their way through that intellectual process. And Rose is saying that as a democratic society, we need to pay attention to low-wage workers. So they're a little bit different. They're talking about the same thing, but Graff is really focused on you as a student and teachers, and how teachers need to encourage students to find their way through academia. Okay, so I hope that's helpful to you. And then again, right, as the example that I gave you, you're going to want to take the quote from the essay, and then, at some point you're going to say, Gerald Graff writes the following, or he reported the following. And then you want to remember to give the page number. So that is the response. What did Rose say? And then how are they different? And then lastly, what's your take on it? Like, are you at all engaged in a way that you think, yes, I want to be more book smart? Or are you thinking, well, this is okay, I can learn these skills, but I don't see myself doing this in the long term? All right, so that's really what we're asking you to do today on that discussion board. And then I will see you all next week. So check the syllabus for the readings for next week, because we are going to continue. And also check the Bright Space, because I'm going to assign something from this book for you to do before I see you on Monday. All right, so if you haven't gotten the book, you need to get the book. Get the book for Monday. Okay, see you then.